Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you very much for that, Helen. And as she mentioned, Coralie's got trapped in a call, but we all know what that's like, and I'm sure she'll join us later. So, managing stress in the legal profession. It's really great to see the level of interest, and also, as I've just said, the wide range of different people that joined in. So hopefully this will speak to you all. But do feel free to ask questions, raise your hand, put stuff in the chat. Now, I'm terrible at looking at what's in the chat as I go, as is the usual thing we're trying to present on Zoom. So bear with me, but hopefully Helen or Coralie will see your question or see your raised hand. What I do if you want to ask a question, what I'd love to do is invite you to actually speak with or without your camera on. It makes it much better for me than just talking to the void. If you've done webinars yourself on Zoom, it can feel a little soulless if you don't actually get to interact with people. So let's crack on with this webinar, and I shall attempt to get my slides going. Today's purpose then is to give you a tour of managing stress in the legal profession, as it says, both from a position of managing yourself as an individual lawyer and also looking at it from the point of view of a firm or employer. What's in it for you? Hopefully that if you're within your individual lawyer hat on, it might give you some food for thought. You might come to realize that you might experience some stress. You have experienced some stress. I would really hope to, part of it will make it easier for us all to talk about stress. There's a lot of shame in stress. It's shameful for us to admit it ourselves, and it's shameful to us to admit to our colleagues that we're too stressed, and we'll go into that. So my hope is to reduce that shame and make it more of an easy topic to discuss. In terms of timing, I will talk with the old question from you, which is very welcome, until about 2 p.m. and then we're going to have some Q&A. Thank you for those who already sent in the Q&A that you have. I'll address and answer those at around 2 o'clock, and please also give us some more as well. Let me introduce myself. My elevator pitch when I do networking nowadays is to introduce myself as half lawyer, half human, on the basis that it's a bit of a cheat. It's an easy elevator pitch that gets a laugh, and then people say, oh, what's the half human part? I've been a lawyer now for, well, since 1996. I can't remember whether that's 24 years or something like that, 25. I started off at the bar doing everything, crime, family, employment law, anything, you name it, I took it. And then eventually ended up as an employment specialist with Bond Pierce, as it was then, off to the city, to Stevenson Harwood, back to Bristol and Cardiff, and eventually set up my own specialist employment law firm in 2009, Menzies Law, which is the majority of my time. And so I have spent 12 years running and owning a small law firm and experienced all the ups and downs, highs and lows, stresses and strains of that. So I speak to you as someone who's got both the business owner scars as well as the being a lawyer scars, and the combo can be quite a challenge. And then I've also been a business coach, executive coach for around 3 years, and it's a really interesting combination for me. So that's me. I'll say a little bit about confidentiality. We'll use the good old Chatham House rule here. Chatham House used to be a client of mine, actually. I would love to say that. And they always remind me it's the Chatham House rule, singular, not plural. And it is that everything that we discuss today, whether from myself or any of the rest of you that might wish to contribute, stays within this session and is not to be attributed. Feel free to use the ideas, but just don't attribute them to any people. Okay. Stress is still something, as I said earlier on, which has a lot of shame with it. And by shame, I mean that it's very difficult to admit it to ourselves, and it's very difficult for us to admit to fellow lawyers. And that does get in the way quite a lot. In terms of agenda, there you can see it on the screen. So I'm going to start by telling you a bit of my story. Then we're going to look at definition of what stress is. We're going to spend a little bit of time with lawyers and the negativity trap that we do unfortunately have as a profession, and explore how that contributes to stress and how we respond to it. And then we'll look at symptoms of stress, how that turns up, how you can tell whether it may be with you or a colleague. We'll look at responsibility for trying to manage and reduce stress, both with yourselves and also organisations. Tackling both the symptoms and also the root cause. And my view, which you will be very clear on by the end, is that the root cause of stress is the place to go and spend the time and effort tackling. One of those ways is through a concept called mental fitness that I'll talk to you about. And I can tell you more, and I can provide you with access to that if you're interested. And then finally, I've also got an offer in terms of some free coaching with me for all of you, if you'd like, which I think already mentioned on the advert, and is a genuine offer. Because I woke up one day about 2 years ago with a sort of burning life purpose. I think it must have been my midlife crisis, and it was that I would love to bring a lot more self-awareness and consciousness and better self-management, better emotional regulation and management to the legal profession. Can't imagine why, but it's a really strong thing for me, and that's why I love doing these things, and indeed providing lots of free access to sampling coaching, because my view is that it all helps try and leave this world a little bit better off than I found it. So let me tell you about me. My story and stress. So I said earlier on, I was a young barrister, and I was found that when I was my first few months, first couple of years, particularly difficult at the bar, you are just literally pushed off the deep end of the swimming pool. You're in court with a wig on, being counsel 6 months in. I mean, it's crazy. What do you know at 6 months? And it was really quite stressful. And so the symptoms that turned up for me were headaches, teeth grinding, aching face muscles. I remember all sorts of muscles here and here and here and so on. And I ended up having to get insoles in my shoes just because pounding the pavements in my proper shoes, as of course none of us have worn for a year, used to just jar all the way through my head and neck. So those are the first stress symptoms I noticed. There were probably emotional and psychological ones, but I just didn't realise that at the time. And then as I ended up 5 years in the city as an associate in a city law firm, the symptoms got different and they got worse. The big symptom there was endless infections. Every sniff and cold and snivel and virus that was going around, and of course, packed into the tube, it was easy to pick up. I got it bad. So I would have the symptoms for 2 or 3 days, and then I'd have post-viral fatigue, which means I couldn't get out of bed for the rest of the week. And probably once a month, I would be off for 2 or 3 days with a cold and then the post-viral fatigue. And the post-viral fatigue was just like being made of lead, just absolutely unable to get out of bed and move. And now looking back on it, realizing now how much more than I used to know, the mind and the body are connected. As my body saying, please don't go back to that stressful environment. Please don't go back to work. Perhaps if I just prevent your legs from working, you won't go. Later in life, the physical symptoms are gone. Then stress symptoms turned up in workaholism and in home life, being very distracted, irritable with the kids, restless, grumpy, always thinking about work the whole time. It was always running round and round in my head, evenings, weekends, family time, just work, running in the background. Like when you've got the washing machine on fast spin and you're trying to have a conversation in the same room. Running my own firm did not help that. But it was mostly, I think, the lawyer stress rather than the firm stress. And I have many excuses to justify this.
Luke, sorry, this is Helen. I do apologise for interrupting you and you're in mid-flow. We're getting quite a lot of furious typing feedback. I don't know if it's coming from your end but I've just had a few messages to say there's a bit of noise going on. I don't know if there's anything your end you can do about that. I'm checking my end too.
Okay,
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for that.
I'll turn my phone off.
Just 1 sec, I'll just check something. Yeah, I think it's your typing. Yeah. Thanks for that. Okay, so yeah, I had lots of excuses that I used to justify the overworking. I have to do this. I have to do this work now. I have to get this work done this evening. People need me. I can't afford to lose clients. I'm sure you'll all be familiar with that. I think a lot of that was denial. Most of it wasn't true. My mind's very well-intentioned way of protecting me from discomfort. And we'll explore more of what was going on for me there as well. So I developed more insight slowly into what I call my stress signature, my reactive pattern to the way that parts of my mind would hijack me in unhelpful ways to create more stress and reduce my inability to cope with it. And for me, it was a journey that involved coaching, mindfulness, doing more exercise, trying some therapy, training as a coach. The final piece of the jigsaw was that the most effective, and in fact, the way it transformed most actually, was doing the mental fitness training that I will tell you about later on. And that was when I finally was able to take control of the real stresses for me, which were all those negative thoughts and all that catastrophizing about all the bad stuff that would happen. The mere symptoms, the grinding of the teeth and so on, were not going to help me enough. And nowadays, I am a different person. I feel I'm about 9 out of 10 in terms of being able to resiliently cope with the huge workload, running 2 businesses, running 2 charities as well, 3 teenagers, 2 dogs. I'm not perfect, but I'm a lot better than I was. I think at my worst, I was sort of 2 or 3 out of 10, so I've come a long way. So that's my experience, and also my experience of the medical profession when it comes to stress is not great. The medical profession, and I have a couple of doctors in the family, so I love them dearly, but they are all trained to deal with the symptoms as they present themselves, and very few of them are trained to deal with looking at you as a whole person. So, for example, with the grinding of teeth, I was given a bite guard to wear at night so that I didn't grind my teeth, rather than let's deal with the stress you may be feeling, because grinding of teeth comes from stress. So what I would love to take away, if you take away just one thing today, it's the fact that to deal with stress, you have to deal with the whole person, and you have to deal with the psychological stuff that's going on up here, even if you get physical manifestations. Okay, let's leave me then. So you've got an idea of where I've come from and why this is really important to me. This is also a key thing that I want you to really take away. Okay, life, and for that you could read stress. Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. Okay, and if we exchange the word stress for life, stress is 10% your environment, what's happening to you, and 90% how you react to it. Now, here's a definition. Many people would say, well, stress is the stuff that I'm loaded with. Stress is the workload, it's the pressure, it's the situation. Okay, actually it's not. Stress is your personal reaction, your personal style of reaction to being in a difficult or challenging or pressurized situation. Okay, and feeling stress is a completely normal reaction, usually to abnormal levels of pressure. Stress is not usually a mental health condition, although if it gets too great, it can become one. For example, you could go into burnout. So stress is not external events. It's how you personally respond. And everyone responds differently to pressure. And that's why some people will really get stressed in certain situation or role, while others about them will soldier on. You've all seen this. Some people will apparently be immune. They're not. It's just that they have a different stress threshold, different ways of reacting. Colleagues who aren't getting stressed while others are may just be better at masking their stress reactions. And in fact, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of soldiering on being tough, isn't there? And not showing weakness and masking stuff. That's really important to know and understand, because I think the stress we feel comes from within. It means that we need to recognize that. Also, here's the good news. We've got the chance to change. We've all got the chance to improve, and we can all understand our stress responses and significantly change them if you want to. I've been there and I've done it, and I can tell you that there is definitely a future. You can get to the point where you can have what feels a really stressful role, and you can just renegotiate your response mentally, physically and emotionally to the stressful situation and end up being fine with it. So that is really good news, and I do have some ways of doing that. here's an idea. Stress is sometimes good for you. You may have heard of that. It's like, you know, exam nerves or performance nerves. It's good, it gets you focused. This graph here is the stress curve. And as you can see, if you have a look at it, all the stress on the left-hand side is fine. In fact, if you have too little stress, you get inactive and bored. And then peak performance, where stress is just at the right level, is at the very top there of the curve at peak performance. Okay, and it's really useful to remember. So yeah, we need a bit of it, and we can do with quite a lot of it. But I wonder, when you look at that, where you might locate yourself on that curve. You'll see the dotted line down the middle. Are you just to the left of it, in what is, if you can read it on the screen, just under the word peak, you've got focused optimum stress. Are you there in that nice sort of yellow bit? Or are you, probably like me, in the next quadrant, where you can sometimes go into fatigue and stress overload? Hopefully few or none of you are into the far right quadrant, where it becomes exhaustion, panic, anxiety, or occasionally, perhaps with a very difficult client or a very difficult transaction, you might go there for a bit and come out again. Because of course, you know, this is not static. This stress curve can apply differently to you every minute of every day. But it's useful to remind ourselves, and I'd be interested to know, and interested to ask yourself, where do you think you mostly live on that stress curve? And where do people who you really rate as being very cool and calm and sorted in terms of stress, where do they live? Somewhere down the yellow or green end. And how do they manage that? And then also, who do you know that's into the red and the orange? And what might you be able to do with them and help them? So we always like a nice cycle diagram in coaching, and this one is no different. This is really useful to get to understand a bit more about where stress comes from as well. Stress is the result of thoughts and feelings and behavior, all stirred up and cycling around and around and around. So our stress responses can enter at any point in this cycle. Okay, so stress can come in through thoughts, or negative thoughts. This is too much. This client hates me. I'm going to upset this judge. I'm going to upset this client. I'm going to upset this boss. I can't afford to fail. Things are going to go really wrong. And we can get ourselves going into what we call catastrophization. You climb up a ladder of awful things. So for example, I must get this this email or this report or these pleadings or this document out today. I'm already late. I must get it out now. I must stay all night and do it, because if I don't, the client will hate me. If the client hates me, the client might sack me. If the client sacks me, they might not pay my bill. If that happens, if I run my own business, everyone may decide to leave me. Or if I work for a firm, I might get sacked. If that happens, I might lose all my savings. I might lose my house. I might lose my marriage if I have one, or my partnership. I may end up sleeping in a cardboard box on the street. And it's amazing how often, actually, mostly outside our own consciousness, we go there. We don't know we're going there, but our brain is jumping ahead. So I've got to get this written and finished tonight, even though it's going to have me up until midnight, or it's going to have me past missing the kids and bath time or the family dinner or whatever it is. But I've got to because. Yeah. And outside our awareness, our mind has already decided that we're sacked, we're broke, we're destitute. So it can come in there, and that's where stress can come in. It can also come in with feelings, which are quite familiar and similar. And that's just one further stage around the cycle. You know, this is awful. I'm scared. I can't cope. I'm not good enough. And stress can obviously appear in the behavior part of this cycle as well. Not tackling the problem, avoidance. I bet none of you have ever not avoided something that's difficult. Some of us have really strong avoidance streaks. Others are better, but we all can procrastinate when something's difficult. And I'm sure you all know the client email that you failed to respond to because it's difficult, or the piece of work that you've held back from doing because it's difficult, or the conversation with a colleague, possibly a difficult one that you've avoided for a while because it's really quite hard to have. We also can see problems around denial and also ways of trying to deal with the stress symptoms through what we'll look later on are called STIRBs, short-term emotional release behaviours. It may be drink, drugs, chocolate, cake, having rows, shouting, weeping, throwing things. They can all turn up. So really useful to remember that stress lives in the thought, feelings and behaviour cycle, and it can appear more or less in any of them. Let's get back to remembering this, that life and stress is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it, 90% how you think and feel about it. Something that any webinar on stress management wouldn't be without is the good old stress bucket. And you may have come across this before. I think it's really useful. The idea is that your stress bucket is simply your ability to cope with the demand and pressures that are on you. So when thinking about our personal threshold for stress, it's how big is our bucket, okay? It's a really useful metaphor. We ask ourselves things like, well, what's flowing in to the stress bucket? So for me, as a lawyer who does some litigation and is a business owner as well, it's particularly the litigation, it's the deadlines, it's the clients, it's the bills, and then it's running the business. And they flow in different ways, but I'm quite familiar now with how they come in. My bucket can quite quickly come up. And the metaphor is this, that you've got a tap in your metaphorical stress bucket. And if your tap works well, then you can drain out the stress at the end of each day through the things that help you de-stress. But if your tap's not working well, or the bore of the pipe to the tap is not wide enough, too much stress is coming in, and then the bucket can overflow. And the overflow is when you get seriously affected. And eventually, if your bucket keeps overflowing, you can go into burnout. So I'm interested in you to think about, what are the sources of stress that flow into your stress bucket? And does the tap on your stress bucket work? Out of 10, how good a tap is it? Does your stress bucket drain really well? Do you drain it daily? Do you drain it hourly? Or in fact, do you only drain it when you take a holiday or the weekend? How good is that tap? How do you turn that tap on? What do you do to de-stress or to deal with the stress? And what might be your STIRBs, your short-term emotional release behaviours? Are you someone who, when it's a difficult client, finds yourself suddenly inside your fridge, just hoovering all the contents of the middle shelf into you? Or is it a glass of wine or 10? Or is it smoking? Or is it getting cross with the kids or the dog or whatever it may be? Or finding yourself manically pounding the machines in the gym, or going out and running half marathons every day? What is it that could tell you that possibly you're a little bit stressed and there's a lot of need to release stuff? It's good to think about that. And by all means, share some stuff later on and bring some questions up at the end if you like about your stress bucket, what that's like. Lawyers. Here is a picture of how we mentally feel sometimes, whether we are male, female, and whether or not we have a desk that looks like that. I imagine you've all can agree with me that there are times when that's the place you want to be. I love lawyers. Lawyers are wonderful, lovely people, and none of what I'm going to say is meant to be attacking them, but it's out of a sense of understanding and also real care. But as lawyers, we are particularly at risk from stress and from burnout. We are academically and professionally trained to be cautious, cynical, adversarial, some more than others, thinking about the worst case scenario, planning for the worst case scenario, looking for the flaws and weaknesses in every argument, especially if we have anything to do with litigation, but also with other aspects as well. We are trained to be perfectionist. I'm sure you'd all agree with that. And expected by other people to be perfect as well. We're expected by our clients to be perfect. We're expected by our colleagues and our boss. We're expected by the judiciary to be perfect, and our opponents. You know, I'm sure anyone who's ever appeared in court knows that you can't say to the judge, "Oh, silly me, I completely forgot about that bit that I meant to have brought witness statements for, evidence for, or make submissions to you. Oh God, it slipped my head like a, you know, oh, there was the washing machine delivery yesterday, and then the kids are playing up, and the dog needs to go to the vets. I'm so sorry, Your Honour. How about tomorrow?" You know that can't happen, right? And so we have to be perfect, and that pressure can really build up. We require ourselves to work under these huge expectations of perfection all the time. There are some other jobs that might be similar in that, you know, surgeons, airline pilots, air traffic control, people in very exposed political positions. It's a really tough gig, and it produces a really strong negative mindset. Now, some lawyers exhibit this more than others. Some lawyers manage to do a good day's lawyering and then go home and be entirely zen and not bring any of the negativity with them, which is brilliant. But I think the majority of us, if we are honest, do take some of that negative mindset home. And it's difficult not to. And we also bring it to our attitude to stress. It makes us more prone to self-doubt. It makes more prone to perfectionism, and again to catastrophizing and going up that ladder of inference as to all the terrible things that could happen. So more vulnerable to stress generally is how it leaves us. And also, and this is the really unhelpful thing, more resistant to recognizing or accepting that we are suffering from stress and need to do something about it, or that we need to make changes or ask for help. This culture of perfectionism, of perfection, of high self-sufficiency in the law means it's, for many of us, it's really unthinkable to ask for help or to say, "I'm struggling." I found some research recently from the University of Queensland that lawyers suffer from significantly lower levels of psychological and psychosomatic health and well-being than other professionals. I think that's true. And I had a quick look at the Law Care website yesterday. I'm sure you'll all know about the Law Care helpline. And stress is one of the most common reasons for calling. People name things like impossible targets, long antisocial hours, lack of support, supervision, job insecurity, unsupportive colleagues and managers, and the overwhelming responsibilities of the job also mixed with responsibilities at home. I imagine some of that might be familiar to you. So yeah, it's a tough gig. Stress is real, and our roles are stressful, and our training to be negative and to look for the worst, and to constantly be very, very self-sufficient and need to be perfect it's a toxic mix, really. Poor old lawyers. Let me take you through just some of the symptoms that tend to turn up then. So most of the symptoms are various aspects of psychological, and researchers tend to break it down into 4 lots, so I'll give you those. So first of all, we've got emotional symptoms, which you can see on the screen, and will be fairly obvious to you. Agitated, frustrated, moody, difficult relaxing, etc. Feeling bad about yourself. Then we've got cognitive or thought symptoms, and this is the one which really I resonate with big time. I am that man sitting at that desk there, just all in a fluster. That worrying, the racing thoughts, the forgetfulness, disorganization. I can remember when I was particularly stressed a couple of years ago, I used to forget the name of the fridge. I kid you not, I would say, can you just put that back in the big thing in the corner that's cold? And I, one of my kids said, "That's how grandma got." It felt that this hopefully isn't early onset dementia, but it did have me worrying, and it used to happen quite a lot. I'd forget the name of the car, of the sink, of the fridge. And of course, I was just too stressed. My brain was just whirring away to the point where it was overheating. So that for me is very, very, very familiar, the cognitive symptoms All of which, by the way, massively reduces our performance. And I think one of the questions we got asked before the seminar yesterday was how it impacts on performance. And if you go back to the stress curve and then you think about this slide, there's your answer. Stress massively reduces our performance, which is one of the great business cases for employers and law firms really taking action on stress, because you will get your money back if you have a less stressed staff. Behavioural symptoms, for anyone who's not been to the pub in the last year, this photo is for you. I'm going to be ordering a pint this size as soon as my local is open. We've touched on this already, really. Changes in appetite, taking to drugs and alcohol, or more drugs, more alcohol, and other behaviours that we can fit into STIRBs. And then physical symptoms. Now, this is the stuff that first came up for me, and for some people who are not very self-aware, as I certainly wasn't when I was a young lawyer, this is how it turned out for me, first of all. Very, very common for physical symptoms to occur early on in the jaw and the stomach. The stomach is our primitive brain, and it's very, very strongly connected to our brain, our stomach, especially with very basic instincts like fear, threat, and stress. So it's no surprise at all when we learn that many stomach problems are stress symptoms. Well, you all heard about butterflies in your tummy. Well, that's an example. But of course, it can get worse. And indeed, IBS is an example of that as well. There are quite a few lawyer friends of mine who've got IBS now. And guess what? They all work in highly pressured city law firm positions. My clenched jaw, grinding of teeth, that's in there. It comes up high. Aches and pains and so on. And again, the frequent colds and infections. Again, as I've told you, that was something that I got. So they can all turn up in different ways, and be aware of all these, and be curious, and bear in mind other colleagues and so on as well when things turn up. Physical symptoms are often not just physical symptoms. They are merely the way that the stress is presenting itself. And hopefully nowadays GPs are a bit more clued up than mine were, and would not just say, here's a bite guard for you to stop grinding your teeth, but might actually say, tell me about your job and tell me about the pressure that you may be under, because that would have been much more helpful. Now my teeth are all ground down, which is no good for anyone. So that's a bit of a whirlwind tour of stress, but there was a lot to convey, and thanks for bearing with me. What can we do about it? And when I was coming up with things in terms of responsibilities and responding, I'm very aware that we've got people in the webinar today who both are interested from a personal perspective and also from an organisational. So hopefully I'll cover the whole gambit, but do ask questions at the end if I don't. Personal responsibility, I boil down to three things. Self-awareness, which I come back to again and again, as you've already seen in this webinar. Spotting the symptoms, knowing your stress bucket, knowing your reactive pattern, which I'll come to in a moment, and your personal stress signature, which I'll come to a moment again. Self-management, by which I mean, once you're aware of what's going on, doing things to reduce and alleviate your stress where you can. And we'll look at those in two ways. From just the obvious of getting enough sleep, switching off, good diet, good exercise, through to talking therapies, coaching, mindfulness, possibly counselling if you need it. And then also disclosing your stress. And it seems silly, isn't it, possibly to put it on the slide, but actually it's amazing how many lawyers do not disclose it. We're not alone. Other professionals who are terrible at disclosing stress and through fear of shame about being seen as useless or weak are dentists, doctors, and vets, just as an example. And you can see there's an enormous professionalism with all those. And again, they've all got to be perfect, not get anything wrong, and find it really difficult to suggest that they may be not quite coping with what they're having to deal with. I mentioned reactive patterns, and this one is really fascinating to me. It's quite a psychological angle, but I'll share it with you anyway. Something that we share with all mammals and quite a few reptiles, so it goes a long way back in the evolutionary scheme of things, is our reactions to threat. And as humans, we've got 4 basic reactions. What we share with lizards is the first 3, okay? So when we're in a difficult situation where we're perceiving stress, threat, some sort of external thing which we're not very happy with dealing with, we either go into fight or we go into flight, freeze or appease. So fight is we become angry, irritable, defensive, and that's my standard approach. If I'm stressed at work, I will be very, very busy. Don't talk to me now. Don't talk to me now. Got to get this done. That's my fight. Flight is avoidance, avoiding the task. It could be having a large drink, and so on. So that's where you're fleeing from, and you're not dealing with, and you're doing things to prevent you from dealing with it, or to try and numb the difficulty. Freeze is where you're just stuck, and that turns up in things like having trouble sleeping, depression, and so on, being just cut off from things. And appease is where people's natural reaction is to try and make friends with the problem. Please don't eat me, don't bite me, don't hurt me. What can I do? How can I sort it out? So these are the 4 standard reactive patterns we have when we're under pressure, under threat, and when we're dealing with stress. And I wonder which makes sense to you, which you think your dominant one may be, and possibly with colleagues, friends, family. Knowing your reactive pattern and somebody who's close to you can just give you an inkling of, oh, I wonder if I'm a bit stressed because I find myself avoiding the task, or having an extra large drink, or getting angry and defensive. And then the next question is, so what's going on there? What's going on to cause this? So I mentioned it's quite a psychological angle. I'm not requiring you to be Freud, but it is a really interesting way into whether stress may be happening. And your personal stress signature is this checklist. You will all have a personal way of responding to stress. And as I said earlier, some people show stress symptoms much earlier than other people. We're all different. So how does stress present for you? And here's a great checklist. You ask yourself, what am I feeling? How am I feeling today? What am I thinking today? Because you remember, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all connected. How am I feeling my body? Is there teeth grinding? Is there headaches? Is there muscle tension? Is there a funny tummy? Again, that can often give you a way into thinking how you're doing with stress. What's my behavior? So, do I find myself inside my fridge, clearing the contents into my stomach at strange times of night and day? Do I find myself doing other things which are out of the usual? And they could be the 5th one, which is disturbs. And how am I in my relationships? Am I currently an irritable bugger to my partner, kids, etc., dog? How am I doing there? And they all can potentially give us an inkling as to how we're doing. And of course, at different times we'll be in different places. But if you're stressed, it's really good to know, when I get stressed, these things happen. And one of the things that I've really been able to do with my work and myself is I know when I'm going to get stressed, because these standard things come up. It's almost like a light switches on. Luke is now stressed because I've spent enough time working this out. Does this picture make anyone think, yep, been there? Apart from the fact that both the women seem to have ties on, which I haven't been in an office where the women have had ties on. In fact, the men for quite a few years. But the general feeling of sort of a little bit of pressure and occasional slight mayhem felt quite a nice picture to put up. So where does organisational responsibility kick in here? And I'm conscious that a few people on the call who've got responsibilities, leadership, whether it's generally in the firm or HR or similar. I'm sure you might be interested in this. My take is that we're all lawyers here, or we work for legal organisations. So one thing the lawyers all get trained early on in our law degrees or conversion courses is that every employer has a duty to provide a safe system of work, and that all health and safety legislation is built on that, a safe system of work. And that will depend on the circumstances of the work. Another key thing to remind ourselves is that suffering stress symptoms is usually a normal response by a normal person to abnormal circumstances, abnormal pressure. Okay, different people react differently. And just because some people may survive in a high pressure role doesn't mean that the level of pressure is actually safe and reasonable for all. Some people mask it very well, some people soldier on really well. So I think that spotting and alleviating workplace stress is a joint responsibility, and of course from an HSE point of view, keeping everyone safe from harm is very much a joint responsibility. It's a workplace risk that will be managed and minimised, and employers have a duty of care to protect staff, and staff have a duty to be protected, but also a joint duty to bring these things up with management and with health and safety and so on. So employers, if you've got your employer hat on in this call, be aware of the legal duty of care. Remind yourself that a safe system of work does also apply to stress symptoms, and ultimately your duty there trumps all client needs, profitability, goals, targets, and so on. It can feel in the middle of a busy week, when you are attempting to deliver all those things for all those clients, it can feel rather burdensome and easy to want to put to one side. And it may be that it's quieter times you need to think about stress rather than the middle of a crazy time. And let's also remind ourselves, and let's not kid ourselves, work has got a lot more busy. I've been doing it for slightly longer than I'd like to, and I've actually started my work before we all had PCs on our desk, and we all had email. I'm sure some of you can remember that. It wasn't quite quill and ink, but it was a very different time. And when we first got our PCs on our desks and we first got email, you might get a couple a day. And now I don't know about you, but I probably get 40, 50, 60 emails a day on a bad day. And we all know how life has become so fast. Workplace research has recently suggested that stress in the workplace is as harmful to us as secondary smoking, as sitting next to someone who smokes at their desk all day. And that feels about right to me. It can definitely increase your chances of heart disease and of death and all sorts of other things. So employers have got to clearly recognise their organisation's part. And one thing I would say to senior people is overwork, that's being busy, has become fetishised in the last few years for senior people, professional people, by which I mean it's become a badge of honour, a weird and slightly warped badge of honour. I'm really important, I'm really senior, and look how much I'm overworked. Look at all this responsibility. Look at me working in the evenings and the weekends. It's just what you have to do if you're really senior and really important and really successful. But until the last few decades, last couple of decades, the more senior and successful you got, the more leisure time you had, the more you could get other people to do stuff for you, the more you could have your second home and your yacht and your nice holidays. And you may remember those a generation ahead of you, so your parents' age, when you started in the legal sector, they did tend to have quite a nice life, the most senior partners, the equity partners. What happened? What happened? Well, I don't really know what happened, but I do know that we've all speeded up incredibly. And it's worth trying to just bear that in mind. I think the lawyers who've really got it nailed are those who have got real clarity over when they stop work, who are brilliantly boundaried at saying, right, it's 5:30 and I stop work, whatever. It's the weekend and I stop work, whatever. Or I work part-time and come Wednesday afternoon, that's it. Now that takes some doing, but those people I think are the ones who don't appear to be stressed. In terms of preventative actions for employers, I mean, there's a lot of advice out there, and I'm not the HSE, and I'm not providing you with a webinar on reducing your, your legal risk. I'd say the biggest thing that I could recommend to you, and it comes very much from a coach, but also as an employment lawyer in me as well that's thinking about this, is make it okay to talk about stress. Make it acceptable and not taboo and not shameful. And how does that happen? Well, partners, team leaders, supervisors, talk about stress in your team meetings. Talk about stress and your experience of it and how you overcome it. And if senior people can model an ability to be open and to disclose their own experiences about stress, that will make it okay for everyone else. And I have got countless examples of you where that's been done by partners or supervisors or team leaders in a meeting, and the next day or the next hour, someone's come into their office and said, yeah, can I talk to you about that? And really important things have been disclosed that people are struggling. So this is a tough one, but I'm sure everyone on this call, if they're in a position of influence, management, partnership, has got the guts to do it. Make sure that you not only sign up to well-being, not only provide all those many different things that well-being policies can provide, but also be open and show vulnerability yourself, because it's so important that you model the right behavior. And unfortunately, what I do see in quite a few places, not just in the law, is that there can be wonderful well-being policies. There can be a wonderful counselling helpline through the EPA, and there can be, yeah, it can be yoga, and there can be mindfulness sessions, and there can be fruit, and there can be all sorts of good intentioned things. But if the partners, the leaders, the owners, the bosses still walk around with that steely, thick hide of we're all invulnerable and we don't do stress and we're all perfect, then you're not going to change the culture. But as soon as someone senior sits down and says, yeah, I had terrible stress and this is how I dealt with it, then you'll make all the change that needs to happen. So those are my thoughts. Let's go on to some treatment. I love this picture. This is my favorite picture of the session. This is a polar bear trying to hold down a beach ball. I did a Google search on beach ball holding down, and this one won the competition by some way. So, you know what I'm going to say. Trying to treat the physical symptoms of stress is like holding a beach ball underwater. You can do it just for so much time, and then eventually it'll all go wrong and it'll shoot up somewhere else. Okay. And that's the problem we have with stress. Unless stress is tackled at the root cause, treating the mere symptoms of it will just make that symptom go away, but it'll appear somewhere else. And if you've ever had a damp problem in your house, by the way, the good builders will say, well, I could put you know, something on that wall to stop the damp coming through that part of the wall. What'll happen then is it'll start coming up through your floor or that other part of the wall. Okay. If the stress is going on, it needs to be tackled at the root cause, and just like the beach ball, you can suppress it for so long, but it'll burst up in other places. Now, there's a basic foundation that is good. So good sleep, good diet, good exercise, enough time away from work and switching off, proper switch off. No work emails, no work calls, but that only tends to scratch the surface if someone is experiencing some significant stress symptoms. It's like putting a sticking plaster on a gaping axe wound. It's not going to do the job. What we need to do is tackle the root cause, and that takes us back to thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. Because remember, this is where the stress comes in. Yeah. First of all, then, yeah, knowledge, realizing that stress turns up in our feelings and our thoughts about the work we've got to do and the pressures upon us. It's our personal style of reaction. Everyone has a different threshold and a different personal style. We may be a fight, a flight, a freeze, or a appease. And our bodies will also have different levels of tolerance for the physical symptoms. Okay, so we're all very different. And just because one person or two people or three people in a team may be soldiering on in a very stoical way under huge pressure, the fact that one other person may not be able to cope doesn't make that person the weak one. It makes them within a perfectly normal range. And indeed, it may be the very stoic soldiering on ones that are actually masking the problem, as opposed to being the benchmark that you should measure the weaker person by. Okay. Our personal style of reaction to stress is mostly based on our lived experience, especially how our parents and other significant adults have reacted to stress ourselves, because that's how we learn. You know, we watch our parents. And I've got a question for you, which is, how did you see the adults in your childhood react to stress? Thinking back to your parents, other significant adults in your life, when things were difficult, how did they behave? And what are your memories? Because the chances are that your response will often be very linked to that. Now, sometimes your response will be the same. Sometimes your response will be the opposite, because you are determined not to be like your dad or your mum or whatever. But there will still be a link. Okay. This picture with all these different types of brains, different structures, I think is a really useful reminder that we're all wired differently. Yeah. Sometimes we've had traumatic situations that may also have altered our response to stress. And by traumatic, I'm using it in the medical sense. So we may have just had a terrible client complaint against us. Or we may have seen someone else go through a difficult position. We may have had someone go off to go to the SRA and the SDT, or the legal ombudsman, or just have dropped a real clanger and something went terrible with litigation, or worst case scenario, they were disciplined or sacked. They may be a colleague, not even us, but we will have experiences. And when we're trying to deal with a stressful situation, we come back to the fact that we may catastrophize. If I don't get this right, all these bad things can happen. Okay. Some of us are wired, well, we're all wired slightly differently, and some genetically are wired really quite differently. Some of our stress reactions can come, I find this amazing, can come from our experience of actually being born. Was our birth, as we came out, a relatively smooth and easy transaction as we entered the world? Or did we get caught up in our cord and have to be pulled out by forceps or whatever it was? And actually that is fascinating stuff. This can actually have left us with a more complicated response to stress than others. Really fascinating. So treating the root cause, again, is also a personal responsibility in terms of being self-aware, and I really think this is important. So being self-aware, knowing your stress signature, knowing what triggers you to be stressed, getting really aware of what are the things in my working life that stressed me. For me personally, obviously it's clients not liking my advice and getting upset or cross, which I have a few when I'm advising claimants and it's litigation. It's clients where it's a burdensome case, or the client is difficult to deal with and there's an email in my inbox. I find myself occasionally avoiding looking at an email for an hour or two. And I'm aware now that there's a stress response being triggered, and avoidance is what's come out. So actually I'm going into flight for that rather than fight. And that's the emails in my inbox. Noticing what happens to you and it can be really, really powerful. And that can allow you better self-management, which is you say, I know what's happening here. I can see, and I'm actually going to take action against it. Increase your positivity. Yeah. As I said, lawyers have quite a negative mindset, and we can always find ways to breathe and to think more positively. And no, I'm not going to lose my job over this. I'm not going to lose my house. Okay. Positive mindset can also open up more possibilities for creativity, ways of finding ourselves a route around a problem that we're dealing with. Realistic perspective is something that's regularly mentioned in all sort of stress management advice. Challenging yourself to this ladder of inference. What is the evidence that this client actually is really angry and is going to sack me, or that my boss is going to be really disappointed with me, or that the court is not going to award this application? What is the evidence? Is it really there? Or is this me making assumptions? Because many of our stress responses are based on inference or assumption that things are a certain way. But if we actually logically look at it, use our rational lawyer brain to say, is this really true about this situation? And obviously, sometimes the answer is, well, no, I am sort of catastrophizing a bit. Being clear of circumstances, what you can control and what you can't control. Being clear with yourself about what you may need to start saying no to. No, I will not do any more work. I can't take that on, whether that's to a client or a boss. Having more boundaries. And what you need to start saying yes to. And the yes may be more boundaries, it may be more exercise, maybe more relaxation, it may be getting some coaching, it may be starting a mindfulness course, whatever. And of course, help and support are out there. I've mentioned coaching and mental mindfulness, I've mentioned counselling, psychotherapy, self-work, and there's lots online, and nowadays people can find ways to learn to understand themselves better. Okay. Self-awareness and self-management are definitely the ways to deal with it. I mentioned mental fitness, and this is the way that I really managed to deal with my stress. It's a really powerful way to increase your self-awareness and your self-management. And positive intelligence comes from California. It's a coaching program that I've been trained in. I'm trying not to make it a sales pitch, but I will honestly say that this is something that I do provide. And it helps you really understand a lot more about who you are. And it's an app-based, mostly app-based 6-week program. All of your negative stuff, all of your negative thoughts, worries, concerns, it breaks down into these 9 inner saboteurs, and you learn about how each one turns up for you. And you learn to spot how this negative stuff comes up and how it hijacks your thoughts and feelings, and you learn to stop it. And it's a 6-week program that consists of small exercises using your phone every day. And you'll learn a huge amount about you. You'll learn a huge amount about how you get stressed, and how to see it coming, and how to literally say, no, thank you, stress thoughts. I do not give you permission to hijack me today. And I would thoroughly recommend that if you do find that stress is something which you'd like to do without, then it's incredibly effective. Come and talk to me if you'd like to find out about. I've put my email at the bottom of the screen, luke@lukemenziescoaching.com. There's a page about positive intelligence, and just give me a call and we can talk about it. And I'm running groups every few weeks. It's a really good program. And just to finish off, because I'm conscious we've just come to the top of the hour, this is something I offered before and I'll offer it again. And it's in addition to the mental fitness, and it's coaching. I think we said this in the advertising, didn't we, Helen? Come and have a free coaching session with me. We can focus on stress. It's entirely confidential. It's entirely no strings. I will not be pitching to you. You've got to know me, I think, a little bit already in this seminar, and it'll just be you and me talking about you. We can focus entirely on stress, or we can not talk about stress at all, but other aspects of your work or life. It's a very genuine offer. I'd love to see all of you. We can fit you in on Zoom over the next few weeks. You'll have an experience of just having an hour to talk about you and focus on you in a non-judgmental way, with absolutely no strings attached. And I'd love to see you, as many of you as you'd like to come. If you're not sure about this coaching malarkey, come along, bring your cynicism and find out what it's like. So use the email there, or go back to Helen or Claire Ponting at BLS if you don't get a chance to do a screenshot now. I'd love to see you all. It's a very genuine offer. And as I said at the beginning, my aim is to bring more self-awareness and happier lawyering to the whole legal profession. And this is one of the ways I'm trying to do it. So thanks for bearing with me. I think I've just come 1.5 minutes past the hour. It's very strange doing a webinar when I can't see anyone, but I hopefully have managed to make it vaguely engaging for you. And Helen, how am I doing? I know I've got some questions that I
Yes, you've got some questions, so I'll just pull those up. What I was going to say is thank you very much, Luke. And I've had a couple of people dropped off, but they've expressed their thanks. It's very detailed, and also your very honest approach to this subject. And also from my perspective as well, I was thinking it's, you know, the pandemic, you know, I think in some ways has opened up an opportunity to talk about these things, hasn't it? You know, certainly when we look at, we're reimagining what work might look like. We have people working from home. That works for some people, for other people they're less visible, and in some ways HR and team leaders may know more about their staff than they've ever known, for example, if they're shielding somebody at home, that sort of thing. So there's a real opportunity at the moment to grasp the nettle and for these conversations to be had.
Yeah. Should we dive into these pre-seminar questions? I appreciate some of you may have to go. If you can stay, it's great. I'd love to have you stay on the call. It's up to you. The first question we had, yeah, I've
got one here that's come in from one of the people on the call that's still there. And the question is it possible to become desensitized to stress? The person is saying that they used to find that being slightly stressed made them more productive, but since they've been working under quite a lot of stress in the last year, that sort of continuity of stress levels needs to be higher and higher as time goes by in order to get the same productivity kick.
Yeah, we all adapt and we all change, and as we mature, sometimes we become tougher and more able to cope, and sometimes the opposite, because there's a building up. So yes, I think the answer is that our approach to stress can be different, you know, in every year of our lives. What's important is to just tune in and work out more about what's going on for you and where your thresholds are. And this is what the webinar has been mostly on today. Tune in and find out what your stress signature is, and it may change over time, definitely.
Right. Another one. What do you think is the first or the most important thing we can do to start dealing with our own stress?
I would say come and have a coaching session with me and spend an hour just thinking about how you are. Look at your own situation. I will be entirely non-judgmental, and I will be able to emphasize enormously being a lawyer as well. It's whether it's me or not, I'm being slightly flippant, but whether it's with me or not, just take time to sit down and think about all the things that have come up, and hopefully you can share the slides, or we can have this on YouTube on the BLS channel. Go through it again, and just get curious and committed to finding out. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, that's it on the Q&As on screen. I know that some of the questions we posed to you before, Luke, if there was any, and some of those you were kind of addressed in your talk. Is there anything there that you particularly wanted to pick up on again? And I think sort of separating home and work life is a bit of a nightmare at the moment, isn't it?
It is absolutely. The question was any advice about separating home and work. To which my answer is yes, do it. Do lots of separating home and work. Very hard on that. We're working from home, very hard, but try to do it. I think we're not so good with physical boundaries because we're often working in our homes at the moment, but have rules, have boundaries about this is when I'm stopping work, and when I stop work, unless there's an emergency, I will not look at my emails, I will not take calls, I will not send messages. If you're finding that impossible, then I suggest that's a really good thing to go and talk to a coach about, because that suggests an inability to cope. If you think that that's nonsense and Luke doesn't know what he's talking about and how can he possibly run a business if that's his attitude, go and see a coach, because that's not a normal reaction. That's your mind giving you arguments to try and cope with the difficulties. I may say some challenging things, and that's one of them, that we come up with all sorts of arguments as to why we don't allow ourselves to see the reality. And we can be very, very convinced of these arguments. And if anything I've said today you don't agree with, then I'm going to challenge you and say, I've done quite a lot of training in this. I think I'm right. And I'd love to talk to you in a coaching session about why you disagree, because I reckon it's not all as clear as it may feel. But I used to be there. I used to be, it's nonsense, it's all fine, I can manage all this, nothing's wrong with me, I'm impregnable. And it took quite a few years to actually get through that fortress wall to realize that that was just a load of nonsense. It felt really good at the time, but it wasn't true. Other useful questions that have come up. what was there? Talking to, how do I talk to a supervisor about being stressed? I think the first thing is to recognize there is a cultural taboo, and then do it anyway. Feel the fear and do it anyway. Perhaps perhaps practice with a partner or friend or colleague about how you're going to present it, so that you can feel a little less weak and vulnerable and silly when you do. But just do it, because the more you hide it, the more it'll fester. What else have we got? What's the impact of stress in the legal sector in terms of economics and lost talent? Well, I don't have the stats. I tried to find some, but I couldn't on just stress, but it's huge. Stress is one of the highest reasons for sick leave. We lost 70 million days through stress last year as a country. And also from anecdotal experience, all of the people I think that were friends of mine over the years, friends and colleagues who've left the law, have done so mostly or entirely because of the stress and the pressure and what it does to them. They don't like the sort of person they are when they're constantly under pressure, and nor do their other halves. So I think there's huge loss when you think about the cost and effort to training someone up. Any other questions you think we should touch on before we let our audience go?
I haven't got any more that have come through the chat box, and I think yes, I think in terms of employees' responsibility for managing their own stress, that's a dual responsibility, isn't it?
Absolutely. Now, hopefully I've addressed that head on.
Yeah.
But both employer and employee have got skin in the game and need to recognise their responsibilities. It can be inconvenient as an employer when someone is stressed. It can be a real bore, and I do understand that, but it has to be dealt with.
And similarly, people who are feeling stressed, you've just got to get rid of the guilt. Yeah.
Absolutely. That guilt, that taboo about I cannot show vulnerability is really, really strong. I'd love to talk more, but we've gone way over, and my boundaries clearly need to be put in place. So those of you who are still here, it's been really great. And look, you've got my email address. Connect with me on LinkedIn, email me, call me, talk to me if you're interested. Come and have your free coaching session, please. I'd love to see you. And let's find out about you, and it will be it's always a fascinating conversation to have, and I love meeting you all. And it's completely confidential, as you'd imagine, and really entirely non-judgmental, and intended to be supportive and just open you up to some of the bits of information that you may not be taking in at the moment about yourself and your work and your responses to it. So there we go.
Luke, thank you very much indeed. We've had, again, a few other people who just had to go, but all very, very positive about the session today. So I would like to hope that your people are going to take you up on that offer, and you're going to be a very busy man, and we're going to have a happier, healthier local legal profession as a result. But thank you very much. I mean, exceptionally timely with everything that's been going on in the last year, and such an important subject. I think that was shown by the number of people who both came and stayed on the call right until the very last moment. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.